Hello modelers! Last time we ended with this mock-up / basic structure. I think it was a nice build with some good tricks. Today it's time to, let's say, dress up this structure with different features or textures. It will be a busy episode because we will be building a retaining wall, a curved cobblestone street, a street fence, and finally some rocky mountain sections. Let's get started. We will be texturizing some foam here, and my homemade texture roller made with cat litter needed some more bite. I made a handle from cardboard and then I quickly spread some PVA all over it. I used 1 to 2 mm sorted gravel for the task. As you see, the gravel was simply put on the fresh PVA. While it was wet, I broke down some accumulations. The next day I started the texturing process. I took a piece of styrofoam and start rolling it. The trick is that you go in all directions and you should always turn the roller around. Here you can see the result. Very nice. I cut some sheets out with my thickness foam cutter. I changed the thickness lightly for every cut. We are talking somewhere between 2 and 3 mm. Now it was time to cut out some stripes of different dimensions. I chose dimensions of 7, 10 and 15 mm because I wasn't sure which would be best for my wall. At the end I chose 10 mm wide stones. The stripes were cut at different lengths. You should also remove the corners slightly. Then I took some rocks from the garden and put them and our stones in a metal container. The idea was to soften the edges. You should give it a good shake for some time. And here we have our stones with softened edges. The street structure was pinned to the main structure and both pieces were sanded together in order to get a nice transition. Before I started the wall, I filled the empty space where the rock would be with some remaining pieces of textured styrofoam. And here we go! I started by applying PVA with a brush. I used different lengths of stones, all of 10 mm. Always cover the vertical gap with another stone. That is how it's done in reality. I left the end stones hanging over the edge. We will cut them later. I cast a new batch of cobbles from DIorama mold. I took the cardboard street from the mock-up and cut away the part for the fence. Then I traced the piece to 0.5 mm cardboard. The piece was cut out and now we have the structure where the cobbles will go. I wasn't sure what pattern to follow. In the end, I chose the simplest options of following the curve with the long edge. It looked easy peasy, but I don't know why I had the feeling that soon something would come up and bite me in the ass. I used the cut cardboard to help me guide the first row. And I was right. Already in the third row problems started to emerge. You just have to stop in some spots where the pieces start to misalign. You skip a gap and you start with a fresh piece. In the end, you fill the gaps with smaller pieces. The other problem was that with every row the nice curve from the start was more crooked. I was afraid that I would miss the other curve completely, so I started building the stones in patches. Here, fixing the misfitting stones was even more chaotic. But in the end, everything went well. I'm happy with the result. I removed the guide cardboard. And then the overhanging pieces were flooded with extra thin CA. This way you get an extra strong bond. Here you can see why you need an extra strong bond. The pieces were cut with ordinary cutters. No problem. And also the sanding will not take away the pieces. A quick Scottish trick. Don't throw away the remains. Store them and they can become debris for other projects. I started by marking the positions of the pillars on the styrofoam. I made one every 6.5 centimeters. Then I cut a 1 by 1 centimeter squares of 3 mm balsa wood. I glued them on the styrofoam with PVA. I was careful about the orientation towards the street. I cut the pillars from styrofoam. The dimensions were 1 by 1 by 1.5 centimeter. I simply made them at an angle with a sanding stick. Balsa was the next. I cut some overland pieces from a 2 mm sheet. They were 4 mm wide. I gave some texture to the planks with a steel brush from all the directions. Then I cut some grooves into the pillars. Be patient and precise. As you can see, the grooves meet the planks perfectly. The pillars were glued to the balsa bases. Now you must be really careful to put them tangentially against the road curve. Extra thin CA was used to impregnate the planks. It was finally time to cut the planks to length and glue them in place. PVA was used, and just to be sure, I nailed them in place with pins. As it turned out, it wasn't the brightest idea in this project. Are you asking why? Here you go. The pinning was unnecessary and the pins left nasty holes in the balsa. I filled them with a mixture of repair stucco and PVA. A silicone brush was used as a tool. I was very happy because finally I had the opportunity to test my punch and die. I quickly made some 0.8 mm rivets or nails from 0.5 mm styrene. Those rivets were glued in place with medium C8 applied with the dispenser. And yes, in this clip it looks like I'm a professional and everything goes without problems. In reality, every gluing combination was made. Rivets to tweezers, tweezers to balsa, tweezers together, rivets to fingers, tweezers to fingers, and even fingers to balsa. But jokes aside, those rivets look awesome in the end. With the strict structure in place, I glued the last row of stones to the retaining wall. Those stones were 15 mm high, and they were higher than needed. Now it was finally time to glue the street structure in place. The piece was pinned in place, but I didn't film it. Before we move on to the plaster rocks, I'd like to invite you to like and subscribe to this channel. You can also help me by following me on Instagram. And the most important thing, thanks to my Patreon Alpenhauler. 2 other support Patreons showed up, which makes me very happy. If you want to subscribe to an interactive diorama building community, please check out my Patreon page. The links will also be in the description. I wanted to make a homemade mold for the rocks, so I took the aluminum foil and folded it into 3 layers. I blocked the end with masking tape. Then I made a ball with it. You can repeat the process a few times, but don't exaggerate the pressure. At the end, I made the tray by lifting up the edges. Be careful to leave as many random shapes inside as possible. And our mold is ready. For the plaster I used a generic one for electro installers. It is less than €1 per kilogram, which is very good. I poured around 400 ml of fresh water and started to add the plaster spoon by spoon. I stopped when it was something like this. I poured the plaster into the mold. Then I evened the level with a spoon. Some shaking was used to get rid of the air bubbles. After about 5 minutes you can move the mold without problems. After a few hours you can demold your product. After a day of drying, I started to break it into pieces. Just try to make logical dimensions and shapes for your purpose. And now for the hardest part. Find out what pieces to use and where to put them. First, I found the piece, and then you can easily adjust them according to your needs. When you're ready, you should use a thick glue to mount the pieces. Here I used a mixture of repair stucco and PVA. Don't get easy with the glue. You will be surprised. The glue blocks the piece immediately, even if it's lifted from the ground. Piece by piece, I finish the wall. In the end, I started filling the gaps with the same mixture as I used for gluing them. Just put some paste in place and stipple it a little. This is just a step to fix everything better. Now that I had the rocks, I cut away the stones of the retaining wall to meet the angle of the street. I started to cut away the stairs on the lower terrain. I even added some volume now that I had the rocky wall in place. For the upper part, I started by removing most of the styrofoam to make space for the plaster. If you need a specific shape in the plaster, you can easily carve a groove from the back. That way, the plaster will break along the line. You can trace the piece and number it. That way, you will know where to put it after some time. But you will see that it's hard to do the matching if the other piece is not properly glued in place. Here you can see the glue mix. Roughly 2/3 of stucco and 1/3 of PVA. Mix truly. If you need a thicker mix, add less PVA. And did I mention that the process is messy? Oh my god! I don't remember the last technique that brought half of this mess to my workbench. But we can't always pretend to have a laboratory. Sometimes chaos like this is needed. So, I stopped here for this episode. My daughter is at home with me these days, so the working process is a little slower, but we will go on somehow. The diorama is getting heavier and heavier. I have an idea. Write it down in the comments, what do you think the end weight will be, with the vehicles, figures, trees, etc. One thing is for sure, it will not be blown off the table by the wind. In the reveal episode, I will put it on the scale. The follower who gets the closest guess will receive the t-shirt from the channel. I hope that in the next episode we will finish the diorama and put it in the ready to paint state. Until then, have a nice summer. Bye.